Okay, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, everybody. Gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our next moderator for our next panel, John Steen. John Steen was with BRIM, and BRIM is also a MICA member. John, please welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. So, I think a nice thing about a group like this is that you need very few introductions. A lot of us know each other already, so you know all the panellists. I'll just give a brief introduction to myself. So, as Charles said, I'm the director of the Bradshaw Research Institute for Mining and Minerals at the University of British Columbia. I suspect why I've been chosen for this to be a moderator today, I hope that's the reason, is that I've spent many years looking at the management and economics of innovation and technology. So as we get to this particular panel, which is thinking about our enterprise as a global collaboration, I think we need to consider not just our targets for innovation. I think some of those are very well known to us and discussed this morning, but how we innovate, because I think the how we innovate is going to become very important. I see on the topic, and I was thinking this is going to be a very short talk. How do we see innovation having an impact on the future of mining? And I was thinking, well, I could ask all the panelists, and they'd say yes, huge, and then we can quickly go to lunch. But that's probably not going to do enough justice to the topic. Just to give some background, and I don't know if you've seen this particular graph or curve that was generated by a professor at the Colorado School of Mines. But I think we need to check in on the evidence and really think through, okay, so we all believe in innovation, but where's the data? Do we actually have evidence that shows how much innovation has changed our industry? And, a lot of these things we just take for granted. It's a bit like a black swan event. We can only tell a black swan in hindsight. We can't see it coming. But this particular graph that I'm talking about, what the professor did is he tracked the price of copper over the last century, right? And then, in today's dollars, the cost of copper, was enormous, right? If you go back into we as an industry, what we've done is made copper affordable to the world. And we've underpinned the transformation of the 20th century. So that was cool. But the other cool thing that he did was he actually showed the step changes in that falling of the price of copper with successive rounds of technology. And he said, look, there's an experience curve. The usual things we get, the economies of scale, that accounts for about 30% of the drop in the price of copper in real terms. The other 70% is innovation. So what do we conclude from that? Without innovation in our industry, we wouldn't have the society that we have today. And I think occasionally we just need to recheck on that. But this isn't about the past, this is about the future. And I'd like to welcome the panellists, Adrian, Heather, Jackie and Doug, the real protagonists of this collaboration that we're talking about, and really get their thoughts on how we will work together in the future. I was thinking, let's start on some of the big targets, but decarbonisation, chemical-free mining, water-free mining, all those things are on the agenda. But I'd really like to think about how we innovate. So to start with, if I could particularly ask Doug, the host of this event. Doug, why do you think it's so necessary that we actually globalise our research network? Because we want to be global, but it rarely ever happens.
It rarely ever happens, and that's because a lot of the funding that we rely on for innovation is actually government sourced. And so governments tend to want, the Canadian government wants to spend its research funds or innovation funds in Canada, and Australia wants to spend it in Australia, and everybody does the same thing. There is no such thing as the Canadian mining industry. There is only the global mining industry, of which the Canadian industry is one small part. Same thing is true for Australia. It's a globalized industry, and the problems that we have are globalized problems. The converse of that is also in universities, in our own universities, because the funding is nationally focused, our researchers want to work on a Canadian problem. In the grand scheme of things, mining in Canada doesn't have that very many big problems. There are huge problems in Africa and South America, but Canadian researchers or Australian researchers are typically not working on those things because they don't get funded by their government to work on an African problem. Why are you not working on a Canadian problem? Because the Canadian problems are actually trivial in comparison to the really serious ones. And so the only way for us to do this, I think, is actually to get the groups with the funding they have, and then we then begin to find pathways towards greater collaboration than we've had in the past. And it also means that we actually target innovators that are not inside mining. This is way, way too much an inside mining game. In Canada, we are less than 5% of the total economy in Canada. So that means 95% of the stuff that's happening out there is happening in other sectors, and they do a much more innovation than we do. How often do we talk to any of those people about the kinds of innovation we could use inside this business? Very, very seldom. And so that's the other reverse that we have to execute. I'm going to stop talking because I could talk all day.
So, Jackie, I mean, MIRA has been a leader in global collaboration in our industry for a long time. So, I mean, why do you think it's important that we actually grow our international collaborations? You know, in other words, why are you here with us in Canada?
So I think to Doug's point about governments funding research and development, what we forget is that MIRA is an industry-based organisation. So we are agnostic to governments, and that then provides a platform for industry and researchers to really address these problems more globally. You're absolutely right, Doug. We have to think about these things more globally, and I think I could list a whole lot of projects that we have in MIRA where there are Canadian researchers working with researchers in Australia, working with researchers in Europe, and MIRA provides a unique platform to enable that. One of the critical pieces that we find in that challenge of investment, or I suppose support of researchers, is the wedge of competition it drives between researchers. So there's a piece there about how do we actually support the research community globally so that the connections are far more than national connections, that they actually address industry problems. And that's what we have on offer, is that global piece rather than the national piece.
Yeah. I might turn to Heather with the GMG. So, I mean, one of the challenges with internationalising anything, especially technology, is common understandings or common standards and common agendas. And this is what GMG has been really, one of the things you've been really focusing on. So, do you think that level of understanding can be accelerated if we actually try to get more people internationally inside the mining research network?
The level of?
Oh, the level of sort of commonality, the standards, the shared goals and shared agendas.
I think that the commonalities, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. The commonalities, having that shared practice, finding that sort of, I always think of it as the foundational layer, right? The common taxonomies, the common processes, the shared experience. It's more like a stepping stone to enabling the research community and enabling the technology development community, right? I think. You can't hear me?
I think it might be dead, is it?
Yeah, it'll switch on.
That was mean of you, Doug. You gave me the dead one.
No, that's all right.
Thanks.
The microphone at this side.
All right. Wardrobe malfunction.
Put it on your chin.
Put it on my chin. I need to have a beard. Now it's a problem. We'll just stick it here.
See how that was solved collaboratively?
See, this is a good example.
It was a universal problem.
Yeah, my point was I think it's the foundational layer is important in order to enable the greater collaboration and the greater development across the research, across the technology. And so that's where, for GMG, we see ourselves as a little small piece of the pie. we're not developing tomorrow's technology. We're not driving the research. We luckily have partners who do that important work. But really having that common foundation where you've got, we can speak the same language, understand each other. We've got projects where it's really, we have a project right now with a bunch of mining companies wanting to agree on what they call the equipment and systems in their mine. Because even within a mining company, at different mines, they call it different things.
Yep.
So those sort of things is an enabler.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just talking to a company last week and they have 3 mines and they realised very quickly they need a shared dictionary of different, what things are called. It sounds fundamental, but it's actually quite hard to do.
Yeah, and then you talk about the data issue, which is, we were talking in the hallway how the data issue we were talking about earlier, everything comes back to data, and that if someone said, well, I'm not hearing much ESG today, so, well, data is an ESG issue, right? Again, if we don't figure that one out, we're not going to have something we can build on.
Yeah. I think, listening to some of the companies, some of the mining companies talking about their digital transformation journey, it's sort of almost gone through 2 phases. One is, barrel off down the application of AI and digital twins, and it doesn't work as well as we thought. And we thought, we actually have to get standards into our data and actually have to collect things in the same way. And as if we want to internationalise our research programs, we'll have to go through the same processes. So the experience of GMG in doing that, I think, will be very valuable. Adrian, I might turn to the METS, the supplier sector. How do you see in the future the role of services companies being part of international research networks? Will they play a particular role? Do you think they can be leaders in this area?
I think they're key partners. I don't know that they have to lead on their own. I mean, I don't know that we want to see small technology companies leading early stage research, but certainly late stage research being productised is probably where a channel to market forms for METS companies. And while I'm the CEO of METS Ignited, I shouldn't say this, so the METS term sometimes also confuses people. I think one of our biggest challenges is we stay so far in our silos, and we talk about METS companies and mining technology companies. I mean, if you look at, I use BHP as the easy example. So they've had a project trying to simplify the supply chain, trying to get down to 50,000 vendors in their SAP system. Now, I can guarantee you that the majority of those companies did not identify as METS companies. They just supply equipment, technology and services to the mining industry, and the majority of them supply it to many other industry sectors as well. There is certainly niche companies that only sell in mining and they sell very specific technology, but it's probably not representative of the transformation we're going to see in the sector, and it's the cross-collaboration around common technology platforms that I think, is what's different. But if I go back a step to a little bit of what Doug said and a bit of what Jackie said, there's a global mining industry that all faces very similar challenges, but they've got a very unique set of circumstances in which they operate. And they all invest consistently globally in different research to address those challenges, and the research depth is unbelievable. When we come to government investment in research, now governments do tend to focus on their local economy. In Australia, we've got the opposite problem of Canada. Like, the majority of our GDP is mining, but we still don't collaborate with other sectors. So I don't know if it's it's the size of it that counts. But I think for Doug and I, and the collaboration that we've been forming between MICA and METS Ignited, is there's actually no competition for the technology side. And we're talking to vendors out on the stands yesterday. Everyone says that they've got this world-leading innovation, and you see, well, after you've seen the 35th world-leading version of that LiDAR system, you kind of go, how do I differentiate the two? But collaboratively, all of those companies probably only have 2% of the potential market share that they could have. So it's a non-competitive sport when it comes to innovation and commercialising innovation. So mining companies still need to invest in research to address their big challenges. A global perspective on research is really important. Common framework is really important. But the government investment in the commercialisation of innovation, that's a global sport. And there's no competition. Doug and I talk about this all the time. If every Canadian vendor got all of their product to the global market, and every Australian vendor got all of their product to the global market, there's still plenty more market to serve than any two countries could ever hope for. So, fraught with opportunity.
Jackie, you had a point there.
Sorry, could I just add to the investment in research and development and the consequences for market and the opportunity that affords. The statistics I shared earlier about how Australian mining companies, not the governments, but the mining companies, are now spending 20% of what they spent 10 years ago. And there are consequences in terms of the patent trends in Australia. In contrast, the mining companies, not the governments, the mining companies spend in China doubled between 2008 and 2010. When we were going through the GFC and pulling back, China took a different approach. They doubled and have sustained their investment, not the governments, the mining companies. This is OECD data. And what has happened is they now have an incredible wealth of patent ownership. We're talking about an escalation well beyond what we could imagine. And if we do not invest in technology and research, what we do is hand over our CapEx and OpEx control to China. That's just as agnostic as far as governments are concerned. But if you are taking a government position, you're handing it over if you're not investing in it.
Yep. Yep.
Just to that point about the size of the market. It's
That was one of the slides that I had in my deck that my colleagues forced me to remove because it was just too
they
long.
don't know what we're talking about, do they?
And it was actually talking about OECD countries. Because taking the strategic approach that China has taken, China actually has access to the kinds of copper it will require for the foreseeable future.
But they've invested in it.
That's right, yes. But so the graphs I showed earlier are actually all about a challenge to the OECD countries. Because China has its own sources. There are very few places, and they're mostly in the Americas, where the OECD countries can access the amount of copper that we're going to need to make this transition in these OECD countries. And so we should be focusing on the kinds of problems that exist in the largest copper producing countries in the Americas, because that's our future. If we don't do that, we won't have one, because we will not be able to make the green transition in the way that we would like to.
Well, that's really interesting because we're starting to get to that. We can't talk about the globalisation of the research and development without thinking of how that merges with the geopolitics. If we want to have guaranteed supply chains for all the industries that we want, renewable technologies, electric vehicles, the research that we do will have to be in those big supplying countries like Africa, like South America. Otherwise, geopolitical competitors will do it for us, and they'll take. So, we are at the front as developers of technology of that geopolitical game. It's very interesting to think about that.
I mean, and these are not just technological problems. It's actually technological and social. There's a rebalancing taking place. We can see the turmoil that exists in Peru. Peru is the one country in South America that has the largest capacity to dramatically increase its copper production. Chile is pretty well maxed out. It's not going to increase significantly. The other places that can increase significantly are Mexico and the US. The US, a limitation on copper production is because of previous Superfund sites, which are extremely bad environmental sites, and the reluctance of communities in the US to want to see new copper mines that are going to perform in exactly the same way. So in the US, if we don't solve the ESG problem, there won't be new large copper mines. If we don't solve the social balances that are imbalanced in Peru right now, then we will not have a large number of new copper mines in Peru. In fact, a very large number of very large copper mines in Peru today are barricaded by local communities. So they're not producing at all.
Thanks. I might turn, Heather, just thinking about the challenges of operating internationally. For all of us who've worked in international operations, it can be complex. So maybe just turning to some of the challenges of getting international agreements, things like cultures, time zones. You work across these things, so I was wondering, what's your experience of operating internationally, and what should we look out for?
Well, I think there's layers to it, right? You're right. Operating internationally definitely has I think there's areas that as an industry we're still developing. We're lucky within our industry so many companies are international. And I think when I started working in mining in the 90s, it was sort of a nice lineup of misses as people tried to globalize. But I think we've learned in a lot of ways from that. Within GMG, to facilitate collaboration globally, for sure, the time zones, those sort of things, our joke with the staff is if you haven't messed up a calendar invite, then you're not really on staff yet.
Yep.
Those things are mechanical.
Yeah.
Culture is the big one.
Yes.
The huge one.
Yes.
And it's easy for us to expect what we're used to. And that's something that we're still figuring out within GMG. We're actually, right now, we've just gone through a huge strategic review. And one of the pillars of our strategy going forward is globalization. And how do we, there's language issues. We've always operated in English. But really, culturally speaking, how do we enable the collaboration models that were created in North America and Australia primarily might not be models that really just implant elsewhere. So that's the big one.
Yeah. I mean, the culture issue is key, and it's one that we all often overlook. I mean, coming to Canada as an Australian, I've been to Canada many times, but I didn't actually live in Canada until recently. And you think Canadians and Australians are similar, but actually we're very different in interesting ways. And it's not just poutine.
I have a little example that goes with the culture issue. So I mentioned earlier the time usage model, right, that we developed and we published about a year ago. When it was being developed, it was fascinating to me to watch the depth of disagreement and debate and discussion that happened around how do you categorize lunch. That was the big one. But when we got so that we had about 27 mining companies that really participated in this in-depth review. We got to the point where they were pretty much in agreement, and then someone said, well, wait a minute, some of my mines in certain parts of the world have to have prayer break. And how does that come in here?
Sure.
And no one even thought of it.
Yeah.
So then it was back to the table and consider. But those sort of things are a good example of really, if you want to go global, you got to get outside your own thinking.
Yes, absolutely.
And to that, just the concept of collaboration and what it means in different cultures. Our board comes from, we've got representation from Sweden, from North America, from Australia. And instead of a safety share at the beginning of our board meetings, what we have is a cultural share. And each board member then takes turns to share something that they bring to that collaboration concept. And we had the Swedish version of a cultural element or a cultural sense was about challenging the norm, and they're comfortable challenging the norm and challenging people in the hierarchy. And it was interesting to watch the North American directors go, what? And just having the conversation of how do you collaborate across cultures is fascinating.
I love that idea of your culture share.
Yes. Well, it just stimulates for a MICA where we are across so many cultures, and we're in the business of building collaboration. The first thing to do is, does it mean the same thing to you? Because it doesn't.
That's right. Yeah. When I was a consultant, I remember being called down in the middle of the week. 2 fatalities, big crisis, the mine's all closed down. Can you come right away? Blah, blah, blah. So I arrived on Saturday morning. They picked me up at the airport. We go to the mine. We spend all day till 11 o'clock at night on Saturday. Nobody has a problem with this. We start again at 7 o'clock on Sunday morning. Nobody has a problem with this. And as we're working through the day, I suggested that, we could actually make a lot more progress if we just work through lunch and then quit early, because, I'm getting tired. I've been flying and whatever. The idea of working through lunch was anathema. Oh, no, we cannot possibly work through lunch. That's the only thing that's not happening here in the midst of this crisis is us working through lunch. Okay, we'll go for 2 hours. We'll come back in 2 hours, and then we'll begin again.
Yeah.
It's just a cultural thing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I guess, some time ago I was a business school professor, and we did a lot of studies of innovation, but one of the things I was really interested in is not technology as an outcome of innovation, but technologies that accelerate innovation. And I'd be very interested to hear from the panel, normally we talk about what are the innovations that you're looking for in the future. I'd like to get the panel's view on what are the emerging technologies that are really going to help us work together and accelerate innovation on a global scale. So just, there's no pre-warning, so I'm just stalling a bit to get their time, their brains moving into gear.
So your question is, what are the innovations that drive technology.
What are the
or
innovations
technology?
that drive innovation? So the internet is an innovation that's accelerated.
So the breakthroughs.
But the technologies that enable things like simulation, things like data analytics.
So could I?
Yeah, have a go.
I'd like to argue that data analytics is useful, but it's also been around for a long time. Statistician, we just called it something different. And I think part of that is, we're very excited about data analytics, we're very excited about big data, but what we haven't learned yet is how do we plan so that it's useful big data? Thinking back to Michelle Ash's question. Throughout any design, I think what we're missing is some of that hypothesis setting and that planning. So for me, a lot of the innovation we're seeing now is almost like brute force because we can, but that's coming at a cost. And I think there'll be some really smart design innovations that will help accelerate is to sit back and think. Cybersecurity, for example, how do we bring cybersecurity in? And a lot of that thinking will force us to be smarter about what we do. For me, I think there's something in quantum computing, particularly the swarming. I know the trucks have shrunk, but I wonder if they can go to the size of ants. And that means the technology breakthroughs that are required is how do we get the computational power to actually accelerate. That would be.
So, I mean, I was talking to a company that makes a lot of investments in technology, in mining, and I was saying to them, look, what you've got, and they were young fellows, younger than me, which is not that hard these days. But I was saying, look, you've got to understand that innovation, new technologies move in an S-curve. Everything is an S-curve. You've got that period at the beginning where it doesn't look very promising, and you project out and it still doesn't look very promising. But often there's an inflection point, and that inflection point is the introduction of a new technology. Like quantum computing will enable data processing in a way that we haven't seen before. That will be an inflection point for data analytics. So really thinking about those, what are the technologies that we can look for that will create those inflection points?
Well, for me, actually, the whole question of data and these more sophisticated systems are also very seductive. And they can actually blind you to some of the things that we have. One of the other slides I had to remove, because Charles told me to, was talking about not allowing anybody's opinion to dominate the conversation, not even my opinion. So we started off with very simple data, and some of the data I showed is very, very simple and straightforward. When I was in operations, we actually had a department called Operations Research.
Yes.
And all they did is they went underground into the mines, and they actually timed what everybody was doing. And with very, very simple histograms, they could identify what your core supercritical problem was. And it wasn't the supercritical problem that all us really clever people thought was the supercritical problem. It was problem number X, whatever that was. But it wasn't a sophisticated data collection system. It was relatively simple numbers and a simple histogram, and it points you in the right direction. Once you're going in the right direction, there's a whole much more sophistication is required to actually solve the problem. But I actually don't think that many of these data analytical systems will necessarily help us identify the right one fast enough. And if you think about the curve where if we need to be producing or changing the supply rate of metals by 10-fold growth every year, innovation has to move 10 times faster too, because that's the only way that's going to happen.
Absolutely.
And so how is it that we make these things move faster? And we have to bear in mind that it's a global business, and not everywhere in the world has access to super high level, super sophisticated blockchain type analyses. And many cases, when you look at simple systems, and I've been to lots of very remote places in the world, where a very, very simple piece of technology solves that problem exactly. And nobody did that with calculus. They just said, actually, there's a way to make this work, and it works really, really well. Now, if you take that answer, make it bigger, and give it more power, now you have a real solution to a real problem on scale. Whereas the sophisticated communication systems don't necessarily take us to that destination.
No, thanks, Doug. Heather, GMG takes a very strategic view of different technologies and different platforms. So thinking about the platforms that will enable new innovations. What does GMG see as being really important to get as foundations to get right to enable the next wave of innovation?
I'm not sure if you're changing the question on me. When I was actually, my answer,
Go.
I think, is time.
Time.
So I think the issue we have is we've got so many brilliant minds and great ideas and people that have requirements, but no one has the time they can commit to the collaboration. I mean, we hear that constantly from our members, right? Well, okay, what's the time commitment here? It's the biggest question I have to answer. And can you imagine a world where you could give your people time to meet with the people from the other mining companies, from the vendors, and they really have the time to really work through it? Everything's on a dime, everything's so rushed, and we never have a chance to really fully, sit down and make that collaboration a priority. I think time. We need a time machine, one that pauses time. I think there's a superhero in some movie we can bring in.
There's an advert, and I don't know whether it was in Australia or South Africa, but it was a long time ago, and it was cup of soup. And this advert, what would happen is you make your cup of soup, and the entire world will just pause while you drink your cup of soup. And I always want that cup of soup. That's what I need.
I remember that. Adrian, enablers of the next wave of innovation, what do you see coming through the MET sector that's really exciting?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I'm going to go back before I answer that question because I'm actually going to pick on Doug because of his copper production comments from earlier. So we're sort of talking about the step change of copper production over time and the innovation that's applied, right? So we still look at economic grades, and what are we at the moment? A couple of grams per tonne. So we're still moving a tonne of dirt for a couple of grams of copper, still. So from a sector, we have gone to diminishing returns using the current methods of mining, right? There's desperate need for disruption. And I think we're one of the sectors that has failed to be disrupted. So now what's going to disrupt us? Accountability will be one. So mineral provenance and the ability from blockchain technology to track that ore came from that mine with that carbon footprint and that production with that labour force, with that type of working environment, with that type of shift ratio, that type of transparent accountability of production all the way through to the commodity and the trade. I think something like that could really disrupt the way that we do things and make people go, oh, okay, it's all out in the open, now we need to do something fundamentally different. Because we have, in my view, we have optimised as much as we can. I mean, cultural limitations on adopting technology and behavioural changes aside, we have done a hell of a lot of optimising the old way of mining, but we haven't done enough about thinking of the new way of mining, but it needs a catalyst for change. I also think we've got our skills shortage, we've got the lack of people entering our environment. Unfortunately, I've got a son that's gone to STEM and he's not also going to mining, so Michelle beats me on that one. Yet the kids just grew up for 10 years playing Minecraft, so what a great marketing event that we didn't use. We actually need to get people from outside our sector and give them all of our problems without telling them the way we go about doing it today. The mining industry has this tendency to tell everyone the way it works and this is how it is and then what can you do to help. I think that whole first piece just needs to be chucked out. We need to go to a business school, an engineering school, the environmental science team and say, right, here's what's in the ground, we need it here, we don't want to produce any carbon, we don't want to cause any harm, we want to make it sustainable. What can you come up with? We go to the same think tanks, we use the same approaches, we sharpen our tools, but there's other tools we don't use. So there's an external collaboration piece to that as well.
Thank you.
Could I just add to that? Sorry.
Yeah.
And we've just done a global roadshow through LATAM, Brazil, Chile, and Peru, and had the privilege of meeting with many mining companies in those regions. And one of the things I'm seeing happen is the heads of innovation do not have mining backgrounds. So I think that's the other disruptor, is how can we actually, instead of look out to other industries, is actually start to invite them in. So when you've got a head of innovation that has a forestry background and has optimized the forestry process in their sector, that changes because they can start to ask questions without being loaded by their own experience. And I think that's a key disruptor as well. Bringing those people into our sector.
It's a really interesting comment. I remember talking to an innovation manager at BHP, and I asked her about her background. She said, "Oh, I'm an English literature major." You know, a lot of the people that we really admire as innovators in our industry, leaders of innovation, I think 2 are architects. Where's Cal? Yeah, but I think you know, really opening up our industry. And by the way, have you ever noticed how we talk about our industry? Is there any other industry that you know that talks about our industry? I don't. We are you know, we're a tight-knit group, which is great, but we have very defined boundaries about who's in and who's out. So I think you know, really opening ourselves up would be a positive thing. So that brings us to time. I'd just like to conclude by thanking our panellists, Doug, Jackie, Heather and Adrian, and thank you for your insights and participation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What's the other panel?
What's next?
All this equipment here. Okay. Now we're going to move on to our last panel discussion, which is going to be led by Tony McCooch, who's well known in the industry as a CEO of gold mining companies. Most recently, he was the CEO of Kirkland Lake Gold in Kirkland Lake. And he's going to be moderating a panel with some friends of ours who have been in the investment area. So we have Theo from Ernst & Young. Where are my other panelists? Benjamin Cox from Brim, or one of multiple other backgrounds.
Medical historian.
There you go. Do we have the other panelists here? Or they? No, we don't have any more. Unless they're at the door. Oh, here you go. There you see. Ask and you shall receive. So Vikram is down here. There we go. So 3 out of 4. That's more than enough scope for me to be asking questions. Okay? And I'm sorry about the stools, guys. I found them incredibly uncomfortable, but that's just the stool we have.
It keeps you awake.
Yeah.
You
Hard
can
to
always,
sleep when
you
you're
can always
uncomfortable.
stand up. Hey, Theo,
Oh,
nice
yeah.
to meet you. Theo?
Hey, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Okay. Always good to see you.
Shocking.
Yes. Anyway, welcome, and you know, I guess it has been a long day, and you know, talk about these chairs, but those chairs aren't much more comfortable. I've been sitting there for a long time, so you know, I know this panel has all talked about how do you fund innovation, how do you get the money, excuse me, and I know that maybe the previous panel, everybody sort of knew who was on the panel, but maybe for start we should all introduce ourselves so everybody get a sense and give it a little bit of color. So myself, Tony McCooch, as Doug mentioned, I was previously present CEO of Kirkland Lake Gold. Prior to that, a company called Lakeshore Gold, and recognizing you know, building, you know, what the challenges of excuse me, building mine and market, and being able to, you know, work with what shareholders want and all the, you know, understand all the other stakeholders and the emerging trends that are happening in our industry. And as I will say, our industry, because it doesn't apply to the gold mine, all aspects of our industry in terms of the challenges, and recognizing that, you know, how do we move things forward? How do we get better at what we do? When we talk about innovation, you know, in the end, innovation, even when somebody invented a paperclip, because it made your job easier. We can talk all the things we want about innovation, but if it doesn't make the job easier, and you know what, not the job easier for me as the president CEO, not the job easier for the staff, it's the person doing the work at the face. It's a person there, and there's been a lot of lot of innovation in our industry, so we shouldn't sit there and say the cup's half empty, it's half full. There's a lot of innovation that have happened in this industry over the last few years, but how do we accelerate it? So anyway, maybe I'll let the other ones give a quick outline and then we can talk further.
Yeah, so I'm Theo. I'm a partner at Ernst & Young, but I'm a geologist and a mining engineer. Spent a lot of time in operations. I did do a lot of innovation. I do believe in innovation. I believe that we've done more innovation than we think we did, and that we tend to confuse digitization with innovation. So happy to be on the panel.
Hi, I'm Benjamin. From a mining innovation perspective, I ran structured services for Autotech before it got merged with Metso Autotech. I am currently a PhD student under John Steen, writing a innovation PhD around how to basically value change in technology. I also run the executive education program for BRIM, teaching the business of mining. So I've approached this from a lot of different perspectives. My background is in medieval history, so if we want to talk about innovation, I can give you 1,000-year time cycles, and we can talk about where we've come and where we're going.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me here. My name's Vikram Jayaraman. I'm presently Vice President for DRA in Originations and Capital Markets, and I'm actually a metallurgical engineer by training. Started my career in doing fieldwork, startup commissioning. Have seen the impact of innovation firsthand and how it can actually make the job of mineral processing people easy. In my current role, I deal with a lot of mine financing groups that are specifically looking at putting in finance towards new green approaches to mineral processing and setting up infrastructure, specifically renewable energy and energy storage. And quite frankly, this is where Doug and we converge, is to not process stuff that's waste. So those are the three areas that's really close to my heart, and I'm more than happy to share my thoughts and aspects on this.
Okay. Anyway, thanks. So yeah, you don't want to sit down. You don't have to. That's kind of good.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah.
Well, he's standing. You're
See, Doug,
standing,
yeah,
so
that's right. I'm standing. Anyway, maybe before we start, I mean, this is all about how do we fund the innovations. Maybe I'll give you a little bit of my own industry experience over the last few years, and I'll talk back a little bit when I started up with the Kirkland Lake Gold back in 2016. Deep underground mine. The ventilation was poor or not there, and you have an ongoing concern operation that you got to meet shareholders' objectives. So there had been some work previously by previous management about going to battery technology, battery-powered electric equipment, and I know a lot of people talk about we're going to start let's innovate and come with new all-electric mines. But my experience of the first 20 years of my career, we were all electric mines, battery locomotives, and rail haulage systems. Those were electric mines. We could run a mine. Like if I worked at the Campbell mine, we were a 1,500 ton a day underground mine with 110,000 CFM of air. It was cold. You could work there. It was perfect conditions. Somehow over time we decided to bring diesel equipment. Now you need 1 million CFM of air, and you're still doing the same amount of work. But yeah, maybe you get flexibility. So sometimes, going back to the future is not always wrong. And Inco's had all electric mines in Sudbury, so it's not like it's a new thing. But anyway, I'm sitting here and what first off I say, okay, well we want to go to electric trucks and electric LHDs. So first thing you do is you go and at the PDAC and go meet with the industry. We meet with Tamrock, met with Sandvik, met with Atlas Copco, met with Komatsu, met with Caterpillar. Each one of them told me the same thing. It's too early. We're not there yet. You got to wait till 2021 or 2022 before you could do it. Just stay with what you're doing. I said, well, we can't wait, right? Mm-hmm. We're not able to wait. Hi, Juliana. Sorry. Anyway, anyway, you say you can't wait. So you had to sit there and say, okay, so we're going to fund some work on our own, and and we partnered with a company in California that was building batteries and going, can we build battery powered equipment? And it cost lots. Like you went from purchasing an LHD for maybe $800,000 to with batteries and everything over $2 million. It was so a lot of cost, a lot of problems with it because we were prototypes. But the result was you had a mine that went from producing 150,000 ounces a year to over 240,000 ounces a year during that period. The challenge was you're dealing with others in the industry, and over time, you know, where we wanted to go and how we want to get with the relationship and how we're funding the business and how the business that we're funding to do the work for us is using the funds that we give them, it kind of falls apart. So the big challenge was, how do you put the money in and how do you make sure the money gets to work better? The other challenge was making sure that as we're doing the work, we're getting the knowledge and making sure that we as management, that, you know, and we as what we're trying to do and what we're trying to bring in terms of the equipment and processes in the workplace, that it's actually relevant to what the people in the workplace want to see, right? And there's a lot of talk early on about data mining and all that kind of stuff. And I'll get back to when you talk about, you've got to make a job easier for somebody, or more effective for somebody. If we make it harder, they're not going to want to do it. So, you know, we can give a computer to all the people that work in the mine, but if the computer makes them spend more time trying to figure out how to work the computer and not to run the truck better, then what have we gained, right? If the computer confuses them or causes safety issues, what do we gain, right? So it has to be sort of tied into what people want to see and people can have. And you know, if I go back in the history of our industry, maybe you know, without being too reflective, if I go back to Inco at a time or Noranda at a time, these were companies that developed a lot of techniques and technology that brought the industry in, like whether it was learning how to extract nickel from the sulfides, whether it was learning how to have other uses for and make wire ropes for hoisting plants, whether it was, you know, designing you know, the jumbos and the scoops and the burn cut that we used to take our rounds. Those all came out of industry in the 50s and 60s. A lot of those methods are still in place today. We haven't gone to the next step of how do we take it to the next step of moving and getting away from the old methods. Do we have to drill and blast 8-foot, 12-foot rounds anymore? Do we have to, you know, move muck with LHDs? How do we do these things, which is important? But the biggest part, I think, in terms of being able to adopt it, is to take this not just from this room, not just from corporate offices, but to get down to the workers and find what they want to do and how they can make the change. Because in the end, the development of all those technologies in the past, they didn't come from senior executives at these companies. They probably came from the hourly workers. But anyway, sorry, Juliana, everybody introduced themselves just before you got here, so maybe we'll let you introduce yourself.
Oh, first, sorry for me, I arrived here after the beginning. So I'm Juliana. I am a CEO and founder of MineWell, a platform that connects mining projects with investors. And my background is both in mining and as a process engineer and as an investment banker. So I graduated as a mining engineer from college, worked for 8 years in an optimization group that Metso used to have, I believe they still have, optimizing minings around the world. Then I went to Wharton, got my MBA in finance, and joined Credit Suisse as investment banking, managing mining, and then later I changed to technology when I worked New York, London, and Silicon Valley, where I'm based. My last job was with Morgan Stanley. So it's an honor to be here and see you all.
Okay. So anyway, you know, and maybe we can sort of try to give a little bit more color to the thing, and maybe pass some other people and give some input. But I guess it's all about trying to find ways to get financing for the industry, and you know, how do we get the money to do the work? Because it's one thing to have a good idea, it's one thing to have all kinds of initiative and all kinds of people got to do the work, but you got to be able to pay those people to do the work. And as somebody in one of the previous panels, or even one of the previous presentations, but you got to find ways to commercialize it, and you got to find ways that people can share in the wealth going forward. And maybe just before I move on, just want to reflect one other thing I wanted to mention about was, again, when I was talking about trying to get into battery equipment back in 2016 and 17, and then in 2018 I was at Diggers and Dealers in Australia, and I met the CEO or chairman of Caterpillar. And he said to me, he said, you know, I know what you guys are trying to do, but can I tell you one of the biggest roadblocks we have for getting into this right now is we need to understand if we go to battery powered equipment, it's going to change the amount of parts, it's going to change use of lubricants, it's going to change brakes, it's going to change engines, and we're in the parts business. So until we understand how that's going to happen, we got to be cautious because it's going to disrupt our industry. And yeah, there's a lot of disruption happening. But anyway, you know, I don't know if you want to start, Vikram, in terms of your thoughts on how would you, where do you see the challenges on financing, and where do you see the opportunities?
Sure. I mean, my views, quite frankly, Tony, is I think as an industry, our structure as we are right now is somewhat flawed. Can you hear me okay, or maybe not?
Yes.
Okay. You're sitting right next to me.
You
That's
asked.
good. Yeah. That's excellent. Thank you. I mean, if you take a look at it, and this goes to the point that Tony was making, in reference to how projects are being developed today, the onus of development solely sits with mining companies. And by that I mean they're dealing with three distinct stakeholder groups. You're dealing with the governments and regulators. You're dealing with the communities where you have to be, you know, gaining acceptance to the project. And three, you're dealing with mine financiers. And the group that acts as tertiary in all of this transaction of information and instructions is the mining company. Over the last, let's say, 15 to 20 years, the onus of development, the onus of commercializing innovation, the onus of bringing that innovation into commercial production has been sitting with the mining company. There hasn't been an approach until recently where you've had a community take a leadership role in bringing an infrastructure project into being the primary proponent. If you look at DRA as an example, has done projects in DRC where access to energy can be difficult, so we built hydroelectric power facilities to energize projects. Similar to the point you were making, 1982 was the first time trolley assist based on electric open pit hauling was actually implemented. It was 1982. So this isn't anything new. But why am I giving this example? The reason why it hasn't become mainstream is because the onus of bringing all of these things still rests with mining companies. And if you look at the restrictions of mining companies, initial capital. As long as you have to keep all of these innovations on the balance sheet of the mining company, they will still continue to struggle with this. If you don't bring communities in to become a partner, and not just providing catering services and other things, but actually make them asset owners, part asset owners, we will continue to have these issues. We'll talk about decarbonization until 2050. I want to take a step back and look at what's happening as an example at Wailu. Great example. First Nations participants are now the proponent to develop the infrastructure access to the Ring of Fire. That takes away a significant onus of what otherwise mining companies would have to do in order to get that $1.5 billion worth of investment put in. Where does that capital going to come from if you are a mining company that's responsible? It's not going to happen. Similarly, you look at things like, for instance, renewable energy component and energy storage. The facility to put that in, having done studies, pre-FS and feasibility study for mining projects, it's capitally prohibitive. And as much as finance companies talk about, we want to have ESG scores, we want to have projects that meet our ESG criteria, you ask how many people are willing to put that extra dollar? Not very much. So as a structure, as an industry, we're flawed. The way we approach development projects is somewhat flawed. Unless and until we make mining a world problem, not just the mining company problem, I think we'll continue to have these discussions.
Actually, yeah, that's some good points. You know, when we talk about, you know, we're building a mine, everybody's wondering, well, why are you building a mine? Why are you having problems? And sometimes you're not just building a mine. You're building a port. You're building a railway, you're building a road, you're bringing a power line. I'll go, again, experiences I've had, you know, whether you're in middle of Nevada where it's ranch country, and the next thing you know, there's power systems for people living out in isolated community. There's water, same as for, you know, there's water and a drinking water system. We do more as mining companies than just build the mine, right? So we have to bring in the other times the infrastructure to support what we do. But, you know, Julianne, so we're not putting you on the spot. Maybe you can add some color to this.
Yeah.
Other response.
So, well, I think one of the ways to opportunity is to bring more non-traditional mine investors to the sector. And the way to do it for me is helping companies to bring more transparency. So helping companies to provide disclosure, follow the disclosure metrics and standards. currently, I think it's not so straightforward to a lot of companies. There's different standards, different requirements. So I think it's not only mining, but in other industries, it's a big focus now in decarbonization. Only way we're going to achieve is to increase the supply of metals. We all know this very well. And I think bringing non-traditional investors who are focused in decarbonization, but realize that it's not only investing in autonomous driving or electric cars, we actually need to invest in mining as well. But the way to get them comfortable is first explaining a little bit of the industry. I have spoken with a lot of non-traditional investors through MineWell, and a feedback I receive often is, we don't say anything about mining. It's super complicated, it's volatile. So explaining, making the industry simple for them, and bringing transparency, guiding companies to provide the right metrics.
So,
bounce around.
how many people in this room are in gold? Raise your hand if you're involved in gold mining. Okay. How many of you guys know how much China charges you to be over 6% arsenic on your concentrate?
We don't produce concentrate.
13%. 13% of your revenue can go to the Chinese government for the privilege of being off-spec on concentrate. How many times when I was at Autotech did we ever attend a meeting where someone said the value of setting the Biox plant was $800 per ton of concentrate going through it? Have you ever heard that number from inside Autotech when you were there with me?
Plenty of times.
I don't think we've ever actually quantified it.
Well, a range of figures.
A range of figures were provided. The business case was never provided. There was never a fundamental business case because we didn't value the gap. Because none of us know the gap. We don't know what it costs us to not have a state-of-the-art big rim flotation cell versus an Autotech. By the way, I don't sell any equipment anymore. But when Big Rim wins a flotation cell order, and recovery is only 82% versus Autotech that went at my 85% because probably slightly better, we don't think about the $350 million loss of NPV for all of $4 million of equipment because we've never modeled it from a value perspective. So if you want to get money, start with gap analysis. How much NPV are we consuming for the privilege of being suboptimal? Now, we're not going to change some fundamentals. We're not going to suddenly change an ore body from 0.6% head grade to 4%. We're going to be going down. We're at 0.6 now. We're going to 0.3 within 20 years. Think that through. If we're going to double or triple the amount of copper in the world, we're going to drop our head grade substantially. But we can slightly increase our recoveries. We can look at fixing things, and we can realize there's a lot of cases out there that have incredibly high NPVs. If I go to an evil hedge fund guy, some days I have to look in the mirror to do that, and I say, by the way, there's another $1 billion of NPV on that company's balance sheet for the privilege of putting in the right equipment, you'd be shocked how easy it is to get a $100 million check. Because there's a business case. If I go to a $1 billion hedge fund guy and say, well, I think we need to do the right thing. How many times have you gotten a check written by saying, I think we need to do the right thing? Now, I'm going to break innovation down into two groups. I think we need to do the right thing, and the hundreds of cases we have that are unfunded because we haven't quantified the case we already have. The first 30% of the innovation we need, we know, we have the answers. We just have not taken the time to build a solid business case. Because let's face it, if I go down onto that floor and talk to all these gold concentrate producers and ask them what their spec is, and by the way, I work in concentrate trading some days, and they give me back a spec, and I say, by the way, you're giving Chinese 13%. They're like, no, we're not. I'm like, okay, you don't actually know your business. That's good. Let me move on. Think about that. Think about the amount of times we do those sorts of things. Different perspective.
No, but that's a good point. You know, in the end, you know, things, you got to spend money in some ways, and sometimes spending the money up front, and it looks tough. I mean, I'm investing in this innovation, or I'll use part of your example then when you try to, how do you quantify the business case? It was, again, going to the electric LHD and going, saying, I'm going to not spend 800,000, I'm going to spend 2 million to buy this unit. And you say, well, how can you justify that? And how can you justify going from 90% availability to 70% availability, and from 85% utilization to 60% utilization on this piece of equipment? It's costing you way more, and et cetera. But the reality was, you got to be able to sometimes be brave, recognize that I'm spending money anyway, whether I'm spending money on operating costs or capital costs. In the end, you're able to maintain cash costs and grow production because of it, and so you got more revenue back. So sometimes you got to look for that.
And how many air blower salesmen wanted you to make the transition?
None.
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 Think about the silo there.
Yeah.
Mobile equipment, people who sell blowers.
Yeah.
I guarantee you his cash costs went down.
Yeah. And anyway, so yeah, and Theo, you know, I know from the ENY perspective, you see a lot of things, and definitely been a leader in innovation and trying to promote that in industry. Maybe give us some of your thoughts.
Yeah, so I do agree with all the points I've heard so far on the capital, on the business case. Business case is critical. I like to raise the point, a different aspect of funding, which is really the time. So if you're in the VC environment, we have a lot of clients that actually VC, like venture capitalists or private equity. Timing is critical, and we tend to confuse all the innovations in mining and metals. In my mind, there's innovation you can do with like communities, like startups. There's innovation you do with universities, they tend to be longer. There's innovation you can do with OEMs, and sometimes, like Tony did with Artisan, you can do it with startup OEMs. So give people a chance kind of situation. But they have different time to value. And I think that, you know, the value of money is something that we as an industry need to be more cognizant about. I think we probably need to educate more people around capital. I know that the C-suite, people like Tony or people like CFOs, they understand that, but that capital is not free. There's a cost to it. So the value to get to your innovation or to actually de-risk the innovation is super critical in getting more funding. So same way we build mines with gates or with studies, same way with innovation. When innovation is basically a project. So that's what we usually see. There's been a lot of good ideas, like everybody's, you know, congratulating Rio Tinto, for example, on that automated rail, but they had to do it by themselves, basically. There was Macassa with the trucks underground. I mean the LHG underground. There's also been bad cases, like some of you remember Lubicool. You know, that was great innovation, but wrong timing. So that's what we usually hear from board members and banks.
You know, and getting back to sort of the end of the theme, we talk about themes and the themes happening in the industry and what's driving. And part of it is, you know, as you know, maybe, you know, let's say we go through a period of time, it becomes flavor of the day. We want to get big new approaches in, and we get innovative. And the metal prices are high right now, and everybody's excited. There's going to be lots of uses for lithium and lots of uses for copper. And what happens if the prices drop and then we lose the momentum, right? So how do we maintain that momentum? Now, there's a lot of things coming down, and a lot of new social issues coming off on our industry in terms of, you know, safety for people. How do we continue to provide a safe workplace for people? You know, things like dealing with mental health and other issues around people. Looking at how we reduce our carbon footprint. How do we become more efficient and more productive? And even how do we impact the environment, whether it's tailings deposition and you know, and water and all these areas that are coming in. So there's things that are coming on in our industry that in some ways are forcing us to look inward a bit in terms of where you're going to go. But you know, I know, Juliana, you were talking a bit about you know, some of the ESG effects and how you can use that to sort of maybe go to green investment or in different investments and to get that novel fund financing.
Because I think a lot of the investors, they are looking for ESG also because of the returns. In many cases, you don't consider ESG and you can have an accident. It will cost a lot more. than if you take the right measurements. So ESG is seen as a risk mitigants for many of the investors. And I think when you take everything in consideration, it's not just let's do the right thing, it's let's do the right thing and it's economically better for investors, for companies.
Yeah, and I don't know if you build upon this first.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, him?
Yeah,
Okay, good. No, I'll actually segue to what Julianne mentioned. I'll cite a couple of examples, real-life examples that we're dealing with right now. So we're busy on a couple of projects in South America. Obviously can't name them for obvious reasons. But here's the interesting part of it, is that project, if left alone by itself, it's going to be based on fossil fuel to energize the project. The closest town that actually has a substation is 150 kilometers away. However, there's a river close by that's got a good gradient, right? So the answer was, can we actually look at putting in a small hydroelectric generation station that can actually use the gradient and water flow? There's significant development in providing renewable energy component to it. And we looked at the cost of what this would actually add to the project, and it was not anything cheap. What has changed, however, is that there are some new private equity players that are more than happy to come together and form a special purpose entity and be able to take that scope off balance sheet and say, we'll do over the fence. Here's what it's going to cost you from an OpEx perspective, but it takes the onus of having to develop that energy production off of the mining companies, let's say, focus. So there's one example of a private equity group from Europe that's coming together on a project in South America, taking an integral scope off of the balance sheet of the mining company. And now you've got a project that could potentially become carbon neutral from, let's say, a scope 1 and scope 2 criteria. We can never have good understanding of scope 3. Let's not even go there. But that's one example. The second example that I wanted to cite is, we talk about, and I want to go to Theo's point. There's fundamental difference between fundamental research that happens in university, R&D that happens at OEMs, and actually taking that components and commercializing it and putting it into the project. Right now we're busy on a project, once again in South America, that actually uses microwaves to create differential heating in rocks before it actually reports into the milling circuit. What does that do? It has a significant impact on lowering your energy requirements to break that rock down to particles that you can then now liberate and recover. We're talking about close to 65% reduction in specific energy requirements. It's actually being put into use as we speak. Once again, off balance sheet SPV. So these are the kind of things that's going to happen more with alternative financiers coming in that's got a long-term view on mining projects. I just wanted to cite that as a couple examples to show that this is happening, not as often and frequent as we would want to.
So I'm going to rotate this. As we go to zero emissions, we care about how much GDP we generate per ton of carbon we emit. So for the gold mining industry, how much GDP do you think we generate per ton of carbon? About $9,000. For copper mining, how much do we generate? These are 2019 numbers. They're far better today. For copper mining, how much do you think we generate? About $1,700. For solar, about $2,000. For coal, about $100. Okay? Natural gas, $1.40. We're already a really energy efficient industry versus what we generate. We don't think of ourselves as green because we see our massive footprint. But the massive footprint in mining is two parts in particular, but one part, and that's in blast furnaces. If we decide we want to remove 7% of the global greenhouse gases and replace every blast furnace, how much capital do we need? Order of magnitude. More or less than total debt the US government has.
Lot less.
No, about the exact same.
Same, yeah.
It's about the exact same as the total debt of the US government because we have almost 1.7 billion tons of blast furnaces at $6,000 per ton of installed capacity minimum. And for the new hydrogen stuff, you're looking $15,000 per ton of capacity. You could have the entire Earth covered in solar cells for the cost to upgrade the steel industry, for almost no carbon savings. So one of the things that me and Sally have been working on, and Sally is my much more intelligent partner at UBC, is actually trying to show where the business cases are. We have business cases. Okay? We mine a ton of copper. We drop global emissions by 4,000 tons over the life of that copper versus the 3 tons we use to mine it, mill it, smelt it, and put it onto the solar cell. 3,000? 3. So we have to change our narrative, and that will get us money.
Yeah, I think that's one really thing in terms of the industry as a whole, mining industry. Everybody, like, people look and say, well, it's not in my backyard, or people will look negatively at mining industry. Or when you say somebody's investing, whether to build a power plant, say, oh, I'm investing to support a mining company. You know, we've got to change the narrative. We've got to change sort of the perception of our industry in terms of that doing a lot of really, really good things. You know, we had a discussion when you talk about carbon footprint, or you talk about if the city of Toronto was a mine, we wouldn't be able to sit here where we are today, because this would all be a big water containment pond for all the storm water that falls on the city before you can release it to Lake Ontario. Yeah. We have a different standard that being adopted for the mining industry than everything else, and then because things like this happen, you know, you get negative press. We've got to be able to change the narrative to say that we're actually doing a lot of positive things, and by getting access to other investment, then maybe you can have more willing people to invest to support this industry.
Yeah, that's just to add to what Vikram said around you know, having other players participate. When we hear about Walmart, or even let's pick something simple, Loblaws, okay, we don't really understand the amount of suppliers in the background. In mining, we do have suppliers, but not as many as those other companies that are very innovative. But the innovation comes from them accepting the suppliers' ecosystem, participating in the you know, in how you create value. We are very bad at managing suppliers in mining and metals. Very, very bad. I haven't done a procurement review and not find that our procurement people didn't even have the education required to be sitting where they're sitting. So if we want to innovate, if we want to reduce the amount of failures, we need to really think about adding more suppliers, new types of suppliers, smarter ones, but also have them be able to manage them. Because most of the time, I mean, Tony, we've seen projects, most of the time, what fails in capital projects is really the managing of all these players into the game. So that's one thing. The second one, the second point I'd like to make on mining and the narrative, there isn't, it's actually a similar way. If you think about, and I'm not shooting at IR in particular, but think about big mining companies, think about the size of the investor relation group, and think about the type of talent in the investor relation group. You could never compare that to Bell or Rogers or TELUS. It's not, it's like night and day. So we need to actually think about who are our messengers, because these are the messengers. So to get the money from the VCs or the private equity or like green bonds, we need to have better people doing the narrative. We can't just leave it to the CEOs. It's a machine that needs to happen. And then we also need to make sure we know how to manage suppliers, because that's where we usually fail. So this is what I've seen that we could do better. If pick Amazon, it's hundreds of thousands of suppliers. They're not doing the innovation themselves. It's an ecosystem of innovation. So we can do the same. And then these people become our messengers too. So something to think about.
Anyway, yeah, well, maybe we'll leave some questions from the crowd. So go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Tricia. I have a comment, and I have actually this comment. I would like on both people, on Ben and Dr. Pugh. The first thing I'm going to say is that I am a trade officer, so I support what Ben is saying, because something I realized with the Chinese as customers is that they negotiate their deals to be very low. So even if you give them market price, they negotiate their deals. Thank you. So they negotiate their deals to be very low. So for example, whenever they want to buy off copper, for example, they will actually negotiate it to buy it at a lower price. That's something I noticed even across the board between my European, North American, and Chinese clients. It's the Chinese that always go low. It's a thing. So that's one. Go ahead.
I would love to have a narrative that I'm angry at the Chinese smelters for going low. The fact is, the government puts relatively high tariffs and relatively high boundaries on bringing in off-spec material.
So they might
So
be
when
selling
you
it at a
think
higher
that,
price.
no,
but
they're not selling at the higher price. The government is taxing them for bringing pollution into China. The Chinese government has become very aggressive on not bringing high arsenic and off-spec concentrates into China because they believe that that stuff should be handled in the country of origin. The Chinese government does not want their kids to grow up with arsenic-related cancers for the privilege of supporting the rest of the world. They're maturing. So they're taxing us. And we as an industry historically have not been taxed.
But that's so now we are in a position where at the end of the day, the margin, the profit margin is very low because they're trying to buy at a very low price, sometimes below market.
No, they're not buying it below market.
Yes, I'm a trader. I'm telling you, that's how they do it. It's true. It's not. It's one thing.
They're
It's
creating
one
the
thing
market.
for it's one thing for it to just be theory. This is actually what's happening in my books, right? And to support what you're saying, Dr. Theo, something I've realized is that the truth is there are suppliers in mining because that is what we sell. What I'm trying to work on now is something that Mr. Adrian said. He said, "Here's what we have. We want X, Y, Z, and how can you help?" Because that's the strategy now that I'm going to meditate on to try and work with my suppliers, because we have a lot of suppliers. What we're trying to work on now is our guidelines, so the International Trade Commission guidelines to guide those suppliers to follow the contracts, to deliver when we say we want it delivered. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Adrian, because now that's a strategy I'm going to apply. We need the solution, but thank you very much.
Theo, you got anything to add to that?
I think we need, for innovation, we need a new layer of suppliers. That's what I believe. I mean, when I even listen to the OEMs, I hear some of the stuff that Tony heard back like 6-7 years ago, is that we need a different way to help the industry innovate and move forward rather than just a cash cow and then, you know, I just send you the bill and then you pay kind of situation. So I think that there's a lot of suppliers that are willing to come in, but it's the way we set up our procurement function is not new age yet.
Go ahead.
So just getting to the topic a little bit deeper here. You know, the how to get the funding for innovation. I haven't seen, you know, when I was an entrepreneur with a tech startup, there was Jollymont and maybe Cat had a sort of you know, Series A level funding as well.
Mm-hmm.
That was it, Jollymont and that. And that whole cycle, about 5 years ago, Hexagon also went around, bought up a whole bunch of companies. So the survivability of these small startups is very low. I found out mine was a catch and kill. So how do you survive that even once you get an exit? You know, how do you make sure that that innovation continues? And I just don't see any new funds. I don't see any private equity jumping in or anything like that. And the second thing is, in terms of the actual, how do you quantify the investment in this? I hear people talk about, for example, oh, we need wireless to the face. Wireless provides you one step in the innovation thing. You have a whole bunch of other steps. So it's almost like a compound option where you have to do this, and okay, what's the finance? And then you do this, then you do this. And it's like a rainbow option now because you have multiple layers of risk in every single step. And I'm just not sure the executive understands the level of complexity of a compound rainbow option because they say, oh, that wireless communication, tell me how much tidbit you know, I'm going to get from it, what's the NPV? It's a very different way of thinking, and just the executives that they're just not ready for that level of complex thinking, that it's a multi-stage, multi-risk proposition.
Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
Well, first, I think when you say, you know, startups is hard to survive, you have the big players. Well, if the big players acquire the startup, we hope they will continue the innovation. That's why they acquire them, right? So, someone shaking their head, no.
What's the success rate, though? If you look at things like DevX, Jigsaw, all these different things, how much of them survive post-acquisition?
I have a theory that Tony knows really well. I think that innovation in mining should be mainstream. All these things where people are doing just mining and metals or mining or underground only innovation, they're gonna die. It's not a big market. and you're betting against mining companies picking it. There's a lot of players in that space. When I worked at Dundee with Rick House, we just made it like, if you're not mainstream, we don't care who you are. We don't care if you have 50 years in experience in mining. It doesn't matter. You got to be mainstream, because we talk about innovation a lot, but what is actually changing is technology. So if you think about, Industry 1.0, 2.0, and whatever, and Industry X that we have today is a world of platforms. So if you're going to play in your little silo somewhere in Sudbury, and I cannot plug it into AWS or Microsoft Azure, I'm sorry, that's going to die.
But getting back to that and getting really access to suppliers and getting more mainstream. I mean, I use one example is if we get 5 kV electric systems at a lot of mines, and sometimes you're building a new mine or new mill and you bring 5 kV power in, when in fact the whole, let's say the city of Toronto, it's 15 kV distribution lines. Why don't we buy the mainstream stuff and put that in our mines? And because then now the access is there's more products and they're cheaper, and they're more mainstream. To say the other part is, you make a good point saying we got to get Wi-Fi to the face. And the worst thing happen is if the board and the CEO says, oh yeah, I got Wi-Fi to face. Oh good, everything's solved. No, that's just a tool, right? That's Wi-Fi to face. You got to know it's all the other stuff you need. You need that to get there. It's like saying, I'm going to give you a chainsaw, but if I don't teach you how to cut down trees, as a matter of fact, you don't even know you want to cut down trees. What's the purpose, right? So exactly. I know. I'm sure Ben, you got lots of color you want to add here.
Sure. Actually, while my work husband Ben Murphy, we teach together at Brim, he has a lovely saying, and there's something that really bugs him. He says the number of times he's seen the on-stream analyzer cut from a feasibility study. So you're running a flotation circuit. The first thing you do to cut $2 million of budget is the machine that makes sure the equipment's working. Just think about that for a second. A 0.01% shift in recovery over the year pays for the equipment. A 0.03% shift in recovery pays for the equipment with a 300% IRR. Okay, this is nothing. And this is the first thing that gets cut from every project. Oh, and then they go cheap. They go to manual samplers. Okay, who's ever got a metallurgist up at 3 in the morning to manually sample something? Okay, I'm just trying to give you a sense of where budgets get cut. Budgets get cut by people who have no clue where the little things are that are going to save your bacon. A pump. Let's just take a pump. If you want to talk about carbon footprints, the average slurry discharge pump, I'll give you real numbers. How many Americans is upgrading the average slurry discharge pump replace? If I want to get rid of Americans, their cars, their footprint, their everything from a carbon perspective, one pump, one upgrade, one mine site, how many Americans are we talking? Footprint of 200 Americans in the net change. That's one pump, one site, one mill. Okay, the average site has 10, 15 of those pumps. We are not looking at the lowest hanging ESG fruit because we're just not even thinking about this stuff yet because we're focused on Vikram's issue, which is, what's your budget? Oh, I'm the CFO, 10% less. I don't trust you. Vikram, I need 10% less or else. Oh, I don't trust your SPV, 10% less. Oh, you moved it off balance sheet? No, then now another 10% less.
Make it 15.
Make it 15.
Yeah.
And we wonder why we don't have innovation funded? Oh, you're going to use the Vikram cells. Lovely. And no analyzing. The way I describe how they start these mines up is you buy a Ferrari, a beautiful Ferrari. You put a lead plate over the windshield. You put some whipping cream on the side view mirrors. You accelerate down a road, you don't know where you're going. Oh, and when you crash, that's when you install everything to make the mine work.
I think your question was more like, you want to know the startup world, why innovation, why so many small companies don't get enough support?
Well, we just didn't have it available.
No, it's not.
I still don't see it now.
I don't expect that it'll. So the sector has so many different risks that now people are not going at, like gone are the days of Noranda, Falconbridge, and Inco having all these innovation centers. Actually, they cut them out because they want balance sheet. I think that's going to be the hardest. What I would advise entrepreneurs to do in innovation is actually see how it can be applicable to mining in other places. Years ago, we talked about maybe having like a Google or something work with Macassa and figure out how you do self-driving, because these are electric vehicles anyway. Now, how to do it underground? Well, it's going to be the same like doing it in tunnels. If you think about New York or Boston, there's massive amount of tunnels where these things going to go. So that's an example. If you think about connected worker innovation, it does not have to be mining. It could just be gamers connected world, and you can apply it to mining. So for me, the critical piece is like, if you want to stay in innovation environment, you better be mainstream, at least close to mainstream, because they need to see the exits, they need to see the amount of customers you can get. We have ecosystem innovators in our Center of Excellence at EY, and that's how they do it. Like, they cannot just do mining, they have to do tunnels, they have to do civil.
And I've seen also like other companies going into the mining space and attracting very different traditional investors. For example, Cobalt Metals.
Yeah, Cobalt, yeah.
Yeah, so it's super interesting. They basically using AI to find battery metals more precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And they got investments from some of the largest VC funds in Silicon Valley. So I think what their proposition is, we are going to, we need more batteries, we need more metals if we want to build, sustain the industry for the electrical vehicles. We have a new technology, and they show they are attacking a big problem in a traditional industry with innovation. I think if you are able to show that, you can attract more capital, not only for the traditional investors. And
yeah,
sometimes companies are acquired. I mean, I'm much closer to the tech sector when I see companies being acquired all the time, but not to kill companies. That's basically to support the new business. But you still have options. You're selling the business, raise capital.
And this happens in the mainstream world anyway. The amount of companies that Microsoft and Google acquire and just shelf is massive. But this is just, cannibalism. Okay, just to add to what, so Cobalt is a client of ours. For example, Cobalt didn't say, oh, we're going to go create a technology for lithium underground mining, because that's like a rabbit hole, right? They say we're going to do battery minerals. It makes it more appealing to the broader world than just saying that I'm going to do, 2 levels down. There's a question here.
I have a question for all three of you. Juliana.
There's a mic.
Sorry. You started the question when you said about building the business case. I think all of you talked about the business case, right? So for my own knowledge, I just wanted to know about the health and safety thing that you talked about. Because as a health and safety professional, I find that that's a huge miss when you're building your business case. And I think, having worked in health and safety, in Ontario, I don't think anybody really knows how much it costs for one day. And it's $104,000 for one day off work. Mm-hmm. So your one lost time, one day. So in the mining industry, it's even higher for your lost times. Do a lot of companies actually factor that in their business case if they're doing some innovation to get the money? I'm just asking that because I always find that we always talk about safety in mining and all the innovation and everything. Do we actually go and use that as part of a business case? Do you find that?
If you look at the disclosure, the guidance for disclosure, some of the main ones, SASB for example, they have a whole section, right, to disclose like number of incidents, lost time, and I think investors are definitely looking into it, but when you look at the whole space, not as large as mining companies, but the mid-size, small size, I think some companies are still not reporting, not following the guidance, but I see this as a trend, because to your point, investors who are doing the proper job, they are looking for risk mitigants, and if they're looking into that, they have to see, potential risks and how they can mitigate the risk, and in that case, you have to have things in the process. Often, like in so many of the projects I worked, we have to, we request do a due diligence and ask companies, what are your processes in place? How many times do you test? Right, that's fine.
What I'm looking at more is if you're building a business case and you're going to say, I'm going to save 10 injuries,
I'll
which
actually
comes to $1 million, right? Do people actually do that?
And I'm going to answer that question. I'll give you an actual example. So when projects, maybe not so much projects that are already in operations, but if you look at projects that are being built where that's going through the cycle of feasibility studies, one of the things that do get factored in, for instance, as an example, is how do we reduce the amount of time people have to spend at site constructing and erecting and installing? So concepts such as prefabrication, off-site fabrication, bringing it and Lego blocking it at the site, winterizing buildings first before you let people in to go actually do the work, having adequate amount of operability and maintainability actually built into the design. These are things that do get done in feasibility with the end goal of trying to reduce the amount of effort hours that otherwise people would have to be spending in difficult conditions and reducing the amount of man hours. And I hate to use the word man hours, but unfortunately that's the terminology we end up still using. But the amount of effort hours you would use, it does get factored in. But how often, for how many clients and what segments, that is different.
I think it's far more often than you think. So I'll give BHP as a classic example. BHP requires everyone involved in their projects to drive a modern 5-star safe car within more than 2 years of new, at all times. I know I did a JV with them. I bought a new car. I was the CEO, I was deemed a key person. No, you laugh, and don't laugh, because they flew someone to Portland, Oregon to sit with me and explain to me what I was going to change about my health and safety around how I operated.
Yeah.
And they sat me in a boardroom for a day, and they walked through the costs of me doing something stupid. Now, BHP does that. I know Rio Tinto does that. The tier ones are absolutely line by line figuring out the cost of messing that stuff up.
Yeah.
And it was the helicopter crash in Africa that did it. It was the time when they lost 3 senior executives in one helicopter that completely changed how they valued losing people, and that changed the entire industry. So I think that is absolutely taken into account. Now, does that translate back into investment into new technology? Yes. It does for the tier 1 majors. No questions asked.
But I'll go back to my experiences. So for a long time, so we would know that a first aid injury costs us $7,000. Yeah. A medical aid industry, $32,000. A lost time injury actually could be up to $500,000, right? And that's just the direct costs of that injury, not including the indirect costs that having to get people to replace the loss in productivity. And so but our motivation for improving safety in a workplace was this is the cost side of the business. They actually, well, the motivation is you don't want to get people hurt, so that you can keep things going. And if I go back to the time when we started to equate this, and a few years, we went from like a total medical injury frequency of over 50, right, to now you got an industry where you look at a lot of companies total medical injury below 2, below 1, right? Because there is money being spent on improving condition ergonomics, improving work conditions. A lot of it though is sometimes a lot of it is people doing the work, and I think what we got to do, and I mean, again, whether we adopt an innovation, I think there's got to be a need, and the need for a lot of the change, the need for a lot of different things to be done right. I mean, Apple is really convinced that you need, that you want to buy that iPhone, even if it costs $1,500, because they've created the need in you that you need it. Yeah. If we create the need in the people that they want this stuff and the innovation, it'll get financed, it'll happen, right? But again, it's got to start. I always say we got to flip organization charts upside down, and it's got to start at that level, and they push it down, and we should be there to serve those people, not them here to serve us, right? Exactly. So, but just reflecting on something. I know you mentioned you work for Autotech, right? And Autocampo Oil was a mining company, right? Very innovative mining company. Somehow, at one point in time, they realized mining's too hard. The technology can really,
no, they just split.
The technology can be better. So what we got to do is go back again. We talk about mining companies. We've got to be innovative ourselves, and we've got to learn to share as an industry.
You'd be shocked how much information was lost when they no longer had a mining division doing the technology. The old guards of Fens, they could walk both sides of the path. And the new McKinsey kids, they were different. I mean, somehow it's better to start off at a mine site than McKinsey if you want to run a technology company. I don't know why.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I come from outside the mining industry. I've spent about 40 years in the automotive industry, and my comment and then a question. A lot of the topics have been discussed the entire morning were being discussed in the 1990s, the automotive industry.
Okay, wow.
And we've evolved with very pragmatic solutions to identify waste and find off-balance sheet financing, but also convert what we consider on the balance sheet as a liability to an asset.
Yes, correct.
Right? I come here today as an investor in a startup company that's currently deploying technology in the gold mining industry. My question is the mining industry considering small, medium reactors, a nuclear perspective, to bring in situ energy?
Yes.
Well, I leave that with the panel.
That's the answer.
Yes. Unequivocally.
Okay.
Why don't you get up your ass and get one for us?
Well, you know, I say that because we've talked about external benchmarking outside the industry. The nuclear industry can do, as the Canadian technology is reinventing themselves today.
Yeah.
They are looking for applications, and you may already know this, and I may just be repeating something, for small, medium reactors. And I think that might go to the comment you made about a project you have in South America. You don't have anything but a river close. Comments?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, part of it is definitely there, you know, like things like say, you know, going to small modular reactors. I mean, that has to happen. And maybe sort of getting back to some of the key, what you mentioned, Ben, about what Outokumpu Oy and Outotec was and when it was together and how effective that company was. And if we go back to the Norandas of this world or other mining companies, and what we got to do with now mining company, we just said, okay, we're just going to drill blast it and we're going to sell the product. We don't. We're going to give it. We're going to sell our concentrate to China. We're not going to care what you know. If we're going to complain to them that just you know that you're penalizing us for this arsenic in there. It's not my fault, right? Whereas in fact, maybe we need to understand. We need to be, as companies, we need to be innovative. We need to both fund that aspect of our business with the day-to-day operations and recognize that the only way you're going to improve safety, the only way you're going to improve costs, the only way we're going to get credibility from and that social license that we need to operate and look like as a relevant industry is to not just be focused inward with just a drill blast. I just got to deliver the product to the mill or sell my gold or sell my nickel. They've got to be able to look at ways to do more than just that and get better, you know, in terms of things. But
I just want to quickly respond to the question he asked. The short answer is yes. So 10 years back, it was fossil fuel based. Now people are talking about renewable complement. Classic example, Ring of Fire and SMR, to be able to power your 2 different mine sites and your communities and your First Nations, it's a completely different business case, which we're not talking about today, but that's the future. The short answer is yes.
Think how much land we'd unlock if we didn't have these power lines going all over the world.
Oh, yeah.
But sorry, there's one more question out here, Doug, before you kick us off the floor.
This is another question. My name is Johan Blanken, and I'm a new startup looking to get started in Canada. But I'll just, for the guys involved in nuclear, I think there's hope. There's a Canadian called Joseph Fournier that we've been in discussions with. He has the patent on a pebble bed reactor. We've been in discussions with NASA to build a small nuclear plant for the moon, as well as Mars.
See that?
So there is talent out there, and it's coming. He is Joseph Fournier, Accentrus LLC Limited, based in Houston.
Actually, sorry, can I just do one thing before you, maybe since you got the panel, how about if we just let everybody give one final word? Is that okay? Juliana, if you got one final word?
Yeah, that's very broad. Final words, okay. Well, so I feel like now is the right time to see the change in the mining industry. Why? Because there's much more focus than we think in decarbonization and net zero emissions, and there's no way to forget, you know, the industry that provides all the metals we need for the transition. So I think it's exciting, and it's just the beginning of something we are going to see a big transformation.
Theo, we got.
For me, it's business case, focus on the people doing the work, finding the right capital, having ecosystem, and staying mainstream.
Quantify 3 things, or 2 things. Economic recovery. Actually build a quantifiable, understandable, numbered-based decision, and stop chasing emotional decisions that you really, the red truck.
No, I think everything that had to be said has been well summarized by all the 3. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Sorry. Go ahead, Doug.
Okay. Let us all thank the panel. It was an excellent panel.
Thank you, Tony.
And I'm pretty sure we all heard things that we hadn't heard before. And so that was the value of having events like this, is that we begin to hear things that we normally don't hear because we all live inside our own bubble. One of the bubbles for the mining industry is our greenhouse gas footprint is actually very, very small compared to many of the other major sectors of the economy. Our job is not necessarily to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. It is to help transportation, infrastructure, manufacturing, which are huge emitters of greenhouse gases. It's our job to provide the materials that allow them to dramatically reduce the greenhouse gases that they produce. That's what will have the impact. Unfortunately, we keep hearing all industries across the board are required to reduce by 10% or 5% or 20%. That's not the game. There are big emitters and there are small emitters, and we're one of the small ones. So we need to start changing our narrative, as Theo says, to say we're actually cleaner than most organizations already. We're actually already much safer than many other organizations, sectors as well. So we need to be promoting what's good about the business we do, because everybody, whether they know it or not, needs everything that we do. So thank you to the panels. Let me thank also the fact that Marianne Matijczak, the lady here with the leg cast on, is the chairman of the CEMI board. So she put in a lot of effort to get here today. We also have other members of the MICA Network. Some of them are board members. John Steen from BRIM in BC. John Van Ham, I don't think he's here any longer, is from Inotech, Alberta. We have Paul Labbe from Sask Poly in Saskatoon for the prairies. We did have Alain Beausejour from MISA and Mr. Ben Darley. We still have from Group MISA in Quebec. We had Leah Perry from Mars, and we've had the two guys from Gary Thompson and Michael Long from the Canadian, or the College of the North Atlantic in Newfoundland for all the Maritimes. So we've had a good distribution of all the supporters of MICA and CEMI across the board, across the country, committing themselves to come to this event today. We've had good 3 panels. I hope everybody heard something new and different that makes your thinking slightly different than it was before, because the biggest barrier we have is actually not in technology, not so much even in culture, but it is actually in our way of thinking. And that's what the fundamental thing that has to be changed inside our industry and connecting to the way that all other sectors of the economy function. We're not separate from everybody else. We have to become much more integrated into everything else that happens. And so with that, I'll close the session. Thank you all very much as an audience for coming. It wouldn't have been worthwhile if you hadn't come, so thank you very much for coming, first of all, and staying right to the end. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug.
Really, really.
So
Appreciate it.
Sally,